Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Today is a big day because we're tackling a big job. We're going to totally revamp these long borders, which is why I'm putting out this hessian on the path, partly to protect the path because we're all going to be working on here and it will be messy, and partly to give us somewhere to put the plants on. Now, when we came to Berryfields in the spring of 2003, you may remember that the borders were in position, but they looked completely different. The only plants that they had in them were some daffodils, forget-me-nots, there were some pinks, and a few rather ancient roses, and we took the whole lot out and decided to start again. Now, when you do that, particularly with a big area like this, you've got a choice. Either you can plan ahead, plant quite thinly, and let the borders grow into maturity over a period of about 3 to 5 years, or you can do what we chose to do, which is to plant it up quite intensely, so you get a good display from the first year, but inevitably, after about 3 years, you're going to have to rethink it. Some plants will have grown bigger than you planned, some smaller, some will be in the wrong place, you made mistakes, some colours won't have worked, so you need to really rework it and keep the whole thing alive. Now clearly, we're not going to get this done today. In fact, it could take us months, but it doesn't matter. It's a good time to start, and we can carry on all winter if need be. Now, you may remember that I put up these bean sticks to give us instant height, and we've grown clematis up them all the way down the border. And one of the things Joe's going to be doing today is taking stock of these, working out alternatives, perhaps considering other ways of getting height into the border. And Carol will be concentrating on dividing and splitting and creating new stock from all this old plant material. Right. Hessian has got a beautiful smell. It's nice stuff and quite cheap too. A good thing to use if you want to protect a surface. And when you finish with it, you can then put it on the compost heap. Now, these two end sections of the long border are going to be treated slightly differently to the rest. Because, if we're honest, we've had trouble with it. Things have started to look a bit sickly. The Cardoon did really badly in the summer. And if you look carefully, there are other plants that are not having a happy time or not growing as strongly and as well as the rest of the garden. And I think that's because we've got a pan underneath there. So I'm going to take everything out, absolutely everything in the border, and then double dig it to break up that pan, and then we can replant into good soil. Now, when you're taking stuff out, you need to have containers. These are compost bags, but bin bags will do, and then they will stay in there perfectly healthily. Put a bit of water in the bottom, and they act as pots, really. It's a very useful thing to do. So if we're taking everything out, we can just start in one corner. This box should be easy to take out. It only went in a year or two ago, and box doesn't mind being moved. It's one of those plants that has got fibrous roots, and you can cut them and replant them without too much trouble. There we are. Now if I lift that, you can see, look at those roots. Still very dry under there. So we shake off most of the soil, and that can be popped in a pot or in a bag and will last perfectly happy over the winter. But you can see that the soil here really is not good. It feels as though it hasn't got any life. No wonder the poor plants are suffering. Fairly soon I'm going to have to start the process of working out what we want to keep in the long term, and that may well have to go to other parts of the garden for the winter. What we want to get rid of, we have to be ruthless about that and dump them, and what we're not sure of, and we need to put that to one side so we can either discuss it or Carol can divide it up. Now, this is a rose, and this is actually my favourite rose, Charles de Mills. It's a Gallica, and it's got that wonderful flower that looks as though a knife has sliced the top off, and you have this intense cherry cerise colour. It's beautiful. So definitely want to keep this, and actually, being a Gallica, it's tough and it's doing fine. And unlike box, it's not so keen on being moved. Finally, you can see the job it is. This is only the second plant to take out, but what's happened is that these strong woody roots have broken into the pan. You can see where I've had to break them off and cut them off to get them out. Now what really matters are these fine feeding roots, and we mustn't let those dry out. And it's only because Gallicas are so tough that it's grown as well as it has. Now it wants to go into a large pot. And what we'll do is prune that back and plant it out and keep that over winter and replant it probably around the New Year time. Now clearly we've got to work on the soil, and that is the most essential part of creating any good garden. But it's possible. You can make any soil good. And to prove that, we went up to Yorkshire to visit Dove Cottage Garden, where they too have had to create something wonderful from an unlikely situation.
The garden's on the north-facing slope of Shipp Valley in the Pennines. Quite a cold spot, open to north and northeasterly winds, and we're on quite a heavy clay soil. We were inspired with this naturalistic type planting, using wilder looking plants that'll tolerate a lot of these heavy clay soils.
And it does suit the location as well, having a wilder look. I mean, tropical plants that just look ridiculous. We decided that grasses and perennials and the wilder perennials with the smaller flowers work much better.
The main philosophy is this wilder look to the plantings, and you don't achieve that by putting overbred large flowered plants into them that are getting shorter and shorter. They've got to still have the natural look about them. And it's the depth of the planting as well. It's multi-dimensional when you're looking through plantings into other plants, and other plants beyond will vary the heights of the planting, and so bring some of the really tall plants to the front. So you've got to peer around them to see plants behind. Make it more interesting, bring plants closer to people.
About a third of this garden's grasses, a third, and there's no lawn, it's all ornamental grasses, but they don't self-seed, they just move lovely, like today.
I don't think there are any points that you need to avoid on a clay soil, but you've got to do the preparation. Long term, if you skimp on that first initial preparation of getting the soil right, then you're always going to be fighting that clay soil, and there's nothing going to grow well in that sort of soil. So you've got to work on improving it either with sand and grit and organic matter, and even raising the beds. A lot of the beds now that we would grow the more sort of Mediterranean type things like the sea hollies, catmints, Dianthus, steepers. We've had to raise.
So we split the jobs up according to who's best at what they do and who's stronger. He's good at making coffee, I'm good at making tea. Stephen's great at taking cuttings because he's really fast. We both sow seed. It's lonely if you're on your own, isn't it? So we tend to do a job together, don't we?
Yeah. We tend to cut back in April. You can see the whole of the garden then. It's like a fresh start. And we cut back, we weed, and then we mulch. And then there's not a lot of intervention after that. We tend to try and leave it to its own devices. We let lots of things self-seed. You know, some of the early summer flowering plants we tend to deadhead so that it all comes together much later in the year. But apart from that, if we get 10 minutes and we're not potting and we're not watering and we're not talking to people about plants, then we tend to have 5 minutes, 10 minutes in the garden. And through the winter, we're quite happy to not have any colour. We just get all the very rich browns of the seed heads and the grasses, which we enjoy just as much because you don't get it any other time of the year. And as the garden starts to rest, we have a little bit of a rest and start to think about the following year.
Now, you might remember in the summer, this cardoon was looking as sick as a sick plant can look. The leaves have practically all fallen off, and those that were left on were yellow. And to all intents and purposes, it looked as though it was dying. Now, I never really thought that was happening. And my guess back then was that it had hit the pan that I suspected was under here, because cardoon roots are really quite big. And if they can't break through the pan, they're not going to get the nutrients they need, and if you have a really dry summer, this large plant is going to suffer. They do well in rich soil, particularly if they grow really big. A smaller, younger plant will be happier in poorer conditions. This is the cause of the Cardoon's problems. There's a hard pan of subsoil, quite deep at this point, and because the Cardoon's got big roots, it's taken a few years to reach it. As I was lifting other plants in the border, it was higher up. It has been dug over, but it hasn't been dug over properly, and in certain places, that pan has not been broken. So when we've removed all the plants, this has got to be double dug to break up the pan. And the harder it is to do that, the more important it is that it is done.
Well, this rain has really helped get this out of the ground. It's the perfect weather really for splitting herbaceous perennials. And because herbaceous perennials last such a long time, years and years if they're properly looked after, it's really worth nurturing them. And in the olden days when people had big herbaceous borders, this would have been a regular occurrence every 2 or 3 years. Everything would have been dug up, pulled apart, refreshed and renewed, because the centre of these big clumps gets very old and woody. Now the plant I'm dealing with here is a Kniphofia. It's a red hot poker, but it's been in here for quite some time and it's got very, very congested. And I just know that if we pull it apart, and it does fall apart pretty easily, I think we're going to make a whole load of plants. And I don't think if I put these straight back into the border that they'd cope really with our very heavy soil and the sort of wet that we're liable to get here over the winter. And I think a much better solution is to pot it up into these long pots. Now the compost I'm using in here is this lovely mixture with lots of leaf mould, lots of loam and grit for really good drainage. And because this Kniphofia's got these long tap roots, the long pots are ideal, because what I don't want is to actually put it into a pot and have the roots folded round. It won't work. I think I might actually cut some of this foliage down, because I think that might stop the roots from taking quite so well if they're trying to keep all that going. So that'll be enough. But one of the things that's happened in this border is that some of the plants are making a real effort to colonise the place. The seedlings of Echinops, this great big lobe thistle which was standing right next to the Kniphofia, and it's seeded prolifically, but it's a very handsome plant and I think we could use it elsewhere. So I'm going to pot some of these up too, because look at that, I mean a good tap root, lots of little fibrous root coming off it, but it won't be able to cope with trying to maintain all that foliage. So I'm going to take that off. Looks sorry for itself, but it'll soon put back those new leaves. And I'm going to pot it in exactly the same stuff. Now, we can keep these in a cold greenhouse, or the cold frame probably, or you could just leave them outside, standing in a sheltered place. They'd be just as good. But covering the surface with grit just means that you protect the crown of the plant, it won't rot, and you help drainage right through the pot. And these things are going to be, just like all herbaceous perennials, are going to be dormant right over the winter, so that should protect them till the spring.
Got some more pots here, Carol. Selection of pots for you.
Oh, fantastic. You got any long ones there?
Yeah, there's some on the top there, yeah.
Because that's exactly what we need for this.
Okay.
I'm digging up all these Echinops seedlings. Can you see them?
Oh, yeah, I'll dig some up for you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah, beauty, aren't they?
Great. We're lucky having all this space for our accident and emergency, aren't we?
Yeah, they're not going back in
No.
to the long borders.
That's stuff that's going away altogether.
Divide.
Yeah, that's quite a lot of work,
And
isn't
these
it?
have already been beautifully divided, so they're going to go into keep, yeah? But they need to be labelled first.
They do need labelling. I think I can still tell which is which.
I'm going to leave you labelling these.
Oh, thank you very
Okay.
much.
Yeah, I'm going to go and look at some height in the borders.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really exciting, that.
I won't make a decision without you and Monty, don't worry.
No, full consultation.
Now, these hazel wigwams have been in the long borders in some form or another since the long borders were first here, but because we're refreshing the whole scheme, it gives us an opportunity to change these over as well, and we're looking for something a bit taller. Now I'm just going to dig this clematis up and put it in a plastic bag for the moment, and then pot it up later on. There you go, that'll be absolutely fine. So now we're left with a great big hole in this border, and we know we want to get some height into it. Height is very important. We've got the yew hedge at the back of the borders, which are establishing themselves really well, and they're going to give the sense of enclosure to the whole long borders here. But within the borders themselves, we also want to get plenty of height, like the wigwams, because what happens at eye level as you walk through is really important. So, well, what are our alternatives? There's something like this wooden obelisk, which I'm going to put in place to see what it looks like. It's very traditional. And there you go. Instantly, you've got that height, you've got that structure that will be there all year round with a nice finial on the top. And plants love this trellis work. Something like a rose can easily be tied in, or a clematis will, with its tendrils, scramble up and over it. So that would work really well. This is about £195 for this one, which some people might think is pretty expensive, but it's very well made. But you could easily make something similar to that yourself. But from the traditional to the, well, ultra contemporary, this stainless steel mirrored obelisk is quite stunning, but it's not really what we're looking for. We can't grow plants up and over it. It does bounce the light around and reflects the planting around it, but I think to have a few of those dotted through the long borders would just be too much. And at £5,000, it's way out of our price range, even though there are cheaper ones on the market. But you could also just go for something planted. I mean, this yew cone, it looks stunning, it gets height into the borders, it's a good evergreen plant. We do have the yew hedging around it, but it could work, depending on the style of planting you're looking to incorporate into your borders, this could work very well. But for us, it's a little bit too stately home and not enough country garden. We do know that we want to get some climbers to scramble up and over whatever object we choose. We take this Spanish flag, for example. Carol planted it in spring, and it's been fabulous. Real drama here, plenty of bulk and plenty of height too. And also, when it's died down, we're looking for something that's going to add real winter interest. So it's got to be a beautiful object at the same time. Well, I've some ideas for new structures, but now I need to talk to Monty and Carol.
Christmas is looming on the Berryfields horizon, and I want to grow some hyacinths that will be ready and in flower by Christmas Day. Now, you could dig up hyacinth bulbs from the garden if you grow them and use those, but it is actually a safer bet to buy new ones that have been prepared. And if you're not certain what sort of hyacinth that you would like to plant, you need to go and see them in flower. However, you've missed the boat at this time of year. So luckily, earlier this year, we went to visit Alan Shipp in Norfolk, who keeps the National Collection of Hyacinths.
I think the thing that makes me a complete and utter hyacinth nut is the fact that every spring you see the first little coloured shoots appearing among the green, and then 2 weeks later, the whole of the world around you seems blazing with colour. This is the little species hyacinth that grows in the wild in northern Iran, Iraq, brought over into Europe in 1573, and all the varieties of hyacinths have been raised from this one species. My national collection at the moment comprises 170 varieties. Some of them are fairly recent. Some, in fact, are seedlings that I bred myself. But the most important ones are the very old varieties that were around and in the catalogues of perhaps 200 years ago, that would otherwise, unless they were conserved, would be lost forever. Always the rarest category of hyacinths were the double yellows. I was under the impression that the last ones disappeared nearly 100 years ago, but lo and behold, when I got in touch with the lady in Lithuania, she'd got this beautiful sunflower, and this itself dates from pre-1897. I think it's one of the most beautiful flowers I've ever seen, and extremely rare. This variety, Diana, is my own raising. It's taken me 12 years to get from 1 bulb to 8 bulbs, so unfortunately it will never go into production because it is very difficult to propagate. Normally the last weekend in March, I open up the fields to the general public, and they come along literally in their hundreds, and to move around amongst them, hearing the comments, the oohs when they first smell the perfume, and to couple this with the fact that I'm saving things from extinction is very, very rewarding. Of course, to me, there's a great deal of irony in this, because a number of years ago, I lost my sense of smell completely. But my memory does take me back to the days when I could smell them, particularly just before dusk on a lovely warm day, working among the fields, completely immersed in this beautiful fragrance. It's an unforgettable memory that will live with me for the rest of my life.
The scent of hyacinths can be delicious, but it also can be a little bit much, and I think 1 bowl in a room is enough, and it's dead easy to do. Get yourself a terracotta bulb pan. Put a crock in the bottom to make sure the drainage is good. And talking of drainage, it doesn't really matter what growing medium you use, because it's not providing nourishment for the hyacinths. That's all in the bulb. What it is providing is a rooting material and something that will retain moisture. Now this is Delft Blue, and the one that we did before is called Pink Pearl. You can pack the bulbs in. I've got 12, and I'll get all 12 into this container. These have been prepared simply by chilling them, which tricks it that it's winter. If we just put a little bit of extra compost in between them, and then water them lightly and put them into a cool, dark place. It doesn't have to be extra cold, but it shouldn't be above 10 degrees. And just keep them lightly watered. And when you start to see the shoots appear, about 2 or 3 inches long, then you can bring them into light. The bulb thinks it's spring, it puts on a spurt of growth, the flower bud develops quicker, and then just at the point when it's ready to open, you bring it indoors, and that extra heat will make the flower open faster, and you'll pull out that lovely fragrance. Then when they've finished, put the whole pan outside and forget about it until the foliage has died down. Then you can gather the bulbs, keep them for next year, and plant them out into the garden. Now, this is a good thing to do for Christmas, but if you want to focus just on this weekend, here are some tips for jobs you can get on with.
It's the perfect time of year to plant shrubs. The soil's still warm enough to enable the plant to establish a really good root system before the onset of winter.
Some annuals, like this red auroch, are only too ready to fill the garden with their offspring. It pays to be prompt. Pull out the whole plant, taking care not to distribute seed. It's best to burn it along with roots of perennial weeds. If it's added to the compost heap, you may find it coming up all over the show.
Although autumn is coming in, it's not too late to sow grass seed or lay turf to create a new lawn. The soil is still warm, seed will germinate and grow, and then be in a good position to get strong next season. However, don't skimp on your preparation of your soil, because the quality of that will determine the quality of the grass for years to come. And if you're broadcasting seed, Scatter it not too thickly, then rake it in well. Well, we've cleared the bed, everything out, taken out a trench and discovered what I suspected, really compacted soil. And the only way to deal with this is to double dig. Not something you choose to do necessarily because it is hard work, but it will repay for years and years and years. The basic principle of double digging is simple enough. You take out a trench, keeping the soil in barrows because we'll use that to fill the last trench. And then when you have the sublayer exposed, you need to break it up. And if need be, to do it with a pickaxe. Break that pan up all the way down. And normally a fork will do it for you. But in this case, we want to loosen it all and try and do so to the depth of a spade. Traditionally, you can work the spade in and then turn it over. But we're not going to mix it with the topsoil. Then you put plenty of muck on top of that, all the way down the trench, and turn the next trench on top of it. So you're putting the topsoil on top of what you've broken up. You don't mix up the two. Now, I've divided the plot up into two simply because psychologically it's easier to do a short stretch at a time, work back, turning the top trench in, breaking up the sublayer, and then when I get to the end, I just turn around and come back down again, and I will have completed it. And that way it never need to be done again. And I can make this last weeks if need be. Just do 15, 20 minutes a day, a few trenches at a time, but doing it really properly because there's no point in doing it unless you break that subsoil up.
Yeah, we've been getting rid of some of the height in there, but Joe's got loads of ideas about what to put in its place.
Yeah, some obelisks, yeah. I thought maybe metal that's going to go rusty, you know, so very natural looking, but informally place them through rather than getting too much formality back in.
It'll go rusty with the weather like this.
Very well,
yeah. I think that'd be a nice idea. I mean, the same height all the way through?
Probably, yeah. Don't you think? The same height?
I think so. Yeah.
Carol thinks so. What do you think?
Okay, well, no, I think it could work well. It's been a lot of work clearing this. I mean, it is amazing how that you start to take plants out and they just get mounds of plants just building up.
Yeah, far more than there were in the border in the first place.
It's extraordinary. This, I think, will take a fair few days because it is really, really nasty under there. Yeah. A hard pan. Yeah. Well, that's the end of today's programme. And we're back next week, normal time, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Well, we'll leave you to it then.
Yeah, thanks a lot.